Is quality assurance the conscience of an organization? Brent Griffith believes so. Hello, welcome to episode 5 of the Practical Project Management Podcast. Today I'm talking with Brent Griffith, my brother, who worked for a few decades in the aerospace industry. He has so many takeaways in this episode that I actually made special note for my project management team to meet with him, review his podcast and the notes. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. Episode 5, Brent Griffith.
What's the use of knowing true north?
But I just wanted to ask you which way I ought to go.
You get so caught up in restoring the galaxy to its rightful state.
I understand you're trying. You may be trying too hard or you're not trying hard enough.
Always with you, cannot be done.
Confront the problem. Fight. Win.
Whatever it is we look forward to.
It's gonna be a bumpy ride.
Practical Project Management Podcast.
Well, Brent, thank you so much for joining me today on this 5th episode of our podcast. I'm really excited to hear and learn from you different perspectives on project management because you've worked for a large commercial organization and, coming from a small organization, I want to understand some differences. So why don't you give us a little background and talk about your history? How did you get involved in project management?
Okay, so the short version I'll give you is I spent 4 years in the Marine Corps and going to school at night and working on my undergrad. When I left the Marine Corps, I went to work for, at the time, was McDonnell Douglas Astronautics Company in Southern California. And I worked in a support role as a technician. I went in and I finished my undergrad, and then basically I had advanced into management. Where I had gone into work was within the quality assurance division. And if you know much about quality assurance, or even if you don't, I like to refer to the quality assurance as the conscience of an organization whose primary role is to ensure that the customer is getting the expected and contracted product that they've signed up for. So the internal quality organization acts as that organizational conscience that puts procedures and processes in place to ensure that the product conforms to what the customer thinks that they're getting. And so my background working in quality assurance led me to get into management. So the company I worked for is certainly a Fortune 100 company that builds both commercial and military aircraft. And I had the privilege to work on both some of the commercial and some of the military programs. So let me talk a little bit about how this large commercial aircraft and military aircraft company, and frankly, probably even a lot of our competitors within the aerospace industry, the project management skill set tends to roll up under what we would call program management. So every business unit tends to have what they call programs, and programs are really centered around products. So whether it's an existing product or whether it's a future potential product that you're in the development cycle of, you would stand up this program as a project. And I'll give you an example. Like the 777X program was a commercial program started in development to bring a new highly efficient commercial airplane to market. And that would be an example of a program. Now within the program, they start developing the Gantt chart, the skyline, the schedule of the program. And you can almost use project interchangeably when I say, I'm going to say program, but you can we use a lot of the same tools. We call it program management, but it's really a hybrid of project management. And so we use a lot of the same tools. So in the case, I'll just pick on the 777X. The leadership of the company said, we believe that there's a market opportunity here for a highly fuel efficient twin engine airplane. And we think that we should go ahead and develop that product. And they set aside, obviously, the capital investment to do that. And then they start by appointing a program manager. In this case, I guess you'd also call it a project manager, who rolls all of the resources together into a sub-organization that is often aligned to a matrix from functional organizations. And if a lot of big companies like the one I worked for, you have both a functional organization, and then you have a matrix that applies across the different programs or projects. So you can have a person who works in quality assurance, like myself, and they work across multiple programs or projects. But then you also have individuals who work in a functional area like quality or manufacturing or engineering that are assigned specifically to work on a given project, but they don't really work on other ones. So you have this allocation of resources both functionally and then also dedicated to particular projects.
Okay.
It's an interesting way of structuring the business, because there's a lot of commonality and lessons learned in the airplane business on what works and doesn't work. And so you want to have a core functional organization that retains expertise. I worked there for 33 years. I just recently retired. It had been that way from before I got there. It's been that way for decades. The discipline, and there's good reasons for that, and I think you experience those same reasons, is because you have to have, every function has to have a core body of knowledge that they can take and then apply to different projects. Right. And if you don't create a core organization that maintains that core body of knowledge, this is how we do X, and you simply assign people out to projects, it really makes queuing up the next project a lot more complex, a lot more difficult, and you're constantly having to relearn the lessons you learned. Whereas we would actually put people in the core organization who, like I was in the core organization, I was level 5, before I left, I was a level 5 quality engineer. I had decades working within, I'd been in management for 23 years. And I had so much experience in working across different projects that they wanted me in this core organization so that I could mentor and coach and help new engineers coming up, being assigned to new projects. Yeah, and so we specifically look to put very senior, very experienced people into that core function so that they could take that skill set and then try to clone it into the people who ended up assigned to the specific project teams. So it's an interesting dynamic, because the one thing I will say, the negative of every matrix organization is the politics. The politics within a matrix organization, because people hop back and forth in their career between a project assignment, pure project assignment, back to a pure functional assignment. And so people are jockeying for opportunities, and you can see the power based on that and budgets swing back and forth between the core functional organization and then the programs or the projects. And what's interesting about that is, there was almost a business cycle that says, wow, because core organizations by definition are overhead. You've got this person who may be able to be loaned onto a project, but maintaining that core body of knowledge and skill set is an overhead function. So you would develop this body of experts who are capable of working any project, have this body of knowledge, very expensive overhead function. Leadership would say, oh, our overhead's killing us. We've really got to shrink this core organization. It's too big. So they would quit hiring into that organization, divide everybody up, put them on the projects, and only keep a handful of people in that core organization. Well, invariably, you would lose some of that functional expertise. You would have some sort of failure on a project. And what I mean by failure is some sort of business performance. You didn't meet some business objective based upon a lack of expertise or knowledge somewhere. And then the pendulum would swing back the other way. Oh my gosh, we've lost our critical knowledge base. Let's core up those experts again so that these projects can tap into this knowledgeable resource. And then a few years later, oh my gosh, look at the overhead. This is killing us. The overhead's killing us. Let's quit hiring into that group and divide all those people up, put them back out on the projects. And the pendulum in my career went back and forth multiple times. I got to watch it. It was entertaining because it truly is a polarity matrix organization. You're trying to balance the benefit of that foreknowledge versus the expertise that's needed on the individual projects.
Oh, I'm with you there. I think one of the strategies that I employ, because that, as you indicated, if you lose that knowledge, for us, the damage is in quality, is always in quality. And then, so if if you have new team members that are not very experienced with either the product or the process, then it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you in time. It's going to cost you in quality. What's the damage to, the customers you're trying to attract or the relationship with your customers. So that knowledge retention for our products, for the projects we run, is something that I'm always trying to, and I couldn't imagine doing it with an organization as large as the one you work for. For me, much to the chagrin of my business partners, even when our projects are down a little bit, I'm looking to cross train our staff so I can keep that knowledge, right? And so I don't want anybody to be expendable because of, just a shift in the economy. So I'm looking at cross training because that little bit of knowledge they have over here, I want to keep that. Because as you talked about pendulum, of course, the pendulum always swings. But if you realize that you're really going to kind of stay, trying to run the company and deliver products that make the customers happy, that you make a profit on, you have to weigh and consider all those factors. You can't just knee jerk and say, okay, I'm going to lay off half the staff because we had a cancellation and we lost 20% of our revenue. The cost to regain that knowledge, I think you have to do an ROI calculation, which is difficult to do, on what it would take to get that knowledge back, because a lot of folks are just trying to look at the bottom line and they say, okay, our payroll's too high. It's got to go. And as you indicated, pretty soon what happens, you start having problems and you say, oh gosh, we've lost so much knowledge. We got to get it back.
Right. And knowledge doesn't just return. Like when I retired, 33 years of quality assurance aerospace expertise left. Now I retired, maybe that's not a great example, but I'm not planning on going back. But our average age of experience in the division went down when I left in terms of experience and knowledge. And so that pendulum always goes back and forth. I would say that the that's the challenge. What we did is we tried to we created an organization for project management called Program Management, which was a functional organization that was tasked with maintaining a set of best practices and lessons learned from many decades of trying to stand up new programs. What did we learn? And try to capture that knowledge and then put that in a set of what they call best practices. And then when they would stand up a new program, they would pull someone who had been trained as a leader in this area to assign them to this. And those best practices would guide the deployment of the new program or project. Now, where it gets challenging is we're always trying to innovate. So if I told you that program X, project X, cost $1 million, I'm making numbers up here, to get from drawing board to signed contract, we invested $1 million. Someone's saying, let's see if we can do project Y for 500,000. Someone's always trying to push the envelope and say, let's see if we can do it for less. And they go through that list because there's a huge checklist that comes out of these program management best practices that says, here's all the lessons we've learned. Let's make sure we check all these off and only select the ones that apply to this particular project. The ones that don't apply, we're going to line through them. This line item doesn't apply, so the people making the decision about what
applies
yeah, aren't always knowledgeable in the area that they're making the decision for. So there's a lot of assumptions that go into that whole checklist. So I worked in quality assurance. Quality assurance is an overhead function.
Yeah.
And as an overhead function, there is no customer out there that says, hey, can I pay extra to inspect the product? That's something you have to do to some degree to ensure the product conforms. But there's no value creation in inspecting product. Just like when you run through code in the software world looking for bugs, the customer's paying for you to develop code. They're not paying you to debug the code. Debugging the code is
overhead.
You have to do it. You can't skip it.
Or some companies do. Anyway.
Yeah. They release I won't say the big software firm in the West Coast, Northwest, but that's famous for delivering multiple versions of releases of an operating system. There's a reason people like you and I do not use the first version release of any new operating system. Well,
I can say that, you're right on the money. You're right on the money. And it's tough too, because depending on what market you serve, especially us, we're in social services, they're always underfunded. So how much, the market contributes to the product that allows you to do the testing that they want, right, is always at odds on, I don't know too many software firms that are not-for-profit businesses. So it's always a challenge finding the right amount of testing and quality assurance overhead. And then, of course, your customers don't really want to wait for that to happen either. If you say development's going to take, X amount of time, and then we go into multiple rounds of testing and different types of testing. And, they want the date that the development complete date is going to be, not the ready for market date.
Absolutely. And so I have worked both on the project side as a program quality manager, project quality manager, and I've also worked in the functional organization. I've spent time in both. And the skill set to work within the project side is related to reading contracts, reading proposals, getting into the details of the proposal and asking, what are the economics of this proposal? How do we make it work? How do we make profit at that? Where can we, I'm going to say cut corners, but that, I don't mean cut corners in a negative way. I mean,
you mean look for efficiencies.
Look for efficiencies. Look for things that maybe because of a different technology or a different approach to doing the business that don't need to be done. We had our checklist of what we've always done on this type of project, but there's some new technology we're rolling out now. 3 or 4 of these items on the checklist no longer apply to this new project. How do I capture that savings and incorporate it into either helping the product cost be reduced so that we can sell more, or to increase our profit margins? And now the complicating factor here, so because I've worked on both sides, I've also worked in the commercial aircraft side, developing programs, projects, and I've also worked in the military side. In the military side, your customer, most of the time, it can be a foreign military, but most of the time, your customer is the U.S. government. And the U.S. government brings their own agency with them when they want to buy product. They bring a procurement organization along.
Yes.
They call it a contract management agency.
Oh, yeah. States do the same thing. So do counties.
I'm sure they do. So they add, they've got their own checklist.
I know.
Of what is supposed to be in a project, in a program. They've got their own checklist.
Yeah.
And they tend to be a little more rigid, I'll say, in their view of how things must be done. So you're trying to push, a lot of times you're trying to push the state of the art or new technology go in a different direction than what you've traditionally done. And you've got this huge tension pulling you back toward what I would call a more traditional way, bureaucratic way, tried and true, proven, however you want to say it, but a very risk-adverse organization that says, no, we don't want to do that. I'll just give you an example. We had a military aircraft trainer program that we stood up several years ago. We developed a trainer for the U.S. Air Force, clean sheet. You know, a lot of times you're starting from an existing aircraft platform and then you're either modifying it, making design changes. We started with a clean sheet of paper. We said, we're going to bring a new aircraft to market, a new trainer for the Air Force. Now, one of the innovative things we said we wanted to do in that whole approach is we said, you know what? We're going to use a lot of off-the-shelf products that we've used in other aircraft platforms that have a proven track record that we know. We're going to emphasize trying to go commonality across different platforms. And we penciled in to our proposal that because we were using proven technologies, proven parts, proven performance, we didn't need as much contract oversight on these elements. Okay. So our proposal was, hey, we're low risk. Look how we're reusing a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of historical parts that are used on other aircraft, a lot of history with them, very low risk. So give us a reduction in the oversight. Because what happens when you have a contract management agency providing oversight is it really jacks up your overhead, because you have to work with whoever is assigned from the government in these programs. You have to work with them. Every person that they have, I'm not saying this is mathematically correct, but for every person over here, you got to have somebody over here working with them.
Right, right.
You got to have a touch point, managing that relationship.
Right, and that comes, that's labor and that's cost, right?
Yeah, and mostly it's overhead.
I have to tell you a little tiny story about this. So a former customer that we did a lot of custom product for worked with them internally, and they had their, so state government, and they have their project manager, right? And so the contract is for us to come in and build some custom product into their enterprise. And we had a competitor, and you kind of in these really large organizations, you develop relationships with other vendors, because really there's so much business that as a small company you couldn't get it all anyway. You couldn't manage it. So you, even though they're a competing company, you don't really view them as a competitor. So another consulting company.
Got to help each other out a little bit.
Yeah, and kind of learn from each other too, right? And so another consulting company, after a handful of years, knowing about their projects, what they were on, and boy, they really got taken to task, and they eventually, I would say the products that they built didn't last, didn't stick. Some of the projects didn't complete. And I was having a conversation with the owner of that company, and we were faring much, much better than that. And he asked me, he said, how are you dealing with them? How are you, how all of the things you talked about, just from that risk averse entity and how much they can inject into your costs and all of the requirements they show up with and everything. And I said, honestly, I think your mistake is that you didn't keep a full-time project manager on your side whose sole job was intervention on everything.
Manage the relationship.
Yep. Yeah. You have to, and they have to, even beyond the relationship, they have to watch what that other entity is doing to the project itself and intervene by using the relationship to, because well-intentioned government project managers can totally destroy the product and the whole project unintentionally.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, one of my last assignments a couple of years before I retired, I was the manager of what we call our customer corrective action team. And this would be where our end product government customer would find something that they thought was a non-conforming condition. They would write up a corrective action request, and tremendous amount of paperwork involved in the process. They would write up a request, and there was a very rigid process that you had to follow to mitigate and remedy and then prevent from hopefully find a way to prevent it from recurring. And so you have this army of people who work for the government managing a contract, walking around, so to speak, looking for things that aren't going from their perspective the way they're supposed to go. They find something, whether or not they're right, they find something they suspect is not right. They write it up, they hand it to us and say, here you go, here's a non-conforming condition we want you to address. And we have a lot of labor associated with managing that process. So it's always in our best interest to stay engaged lockstep with the customer. The problem is you get this distance between your customer's representative and your people executing on the project. And if you just let these people wander around looking for problems without somebody there to answer their questions, to say, oh, no, you're misreading that. That's actually this. They end up creating a lot of busy work. Like you say, well-intentioned. They have a job too. Their job is to look out to make sure the product that they're buying meets the contracted requirements. So I totally get it. And that's kind of interesting. See, that's where the quality assurance organization meets up. We are the primary, I would call us the primary liaison with the customer's contract organization from an execution point of view, making sure. So you got the customer contract management monitoring once the contract's been signed. I'm talking about we're executing the contract, got this army of people out there monitoring it. The internal quality people, we're supposed to be monitoring it too. And so we have to stay locked in with these people to make sure that we're all on the same page. It's just so amazing. It's amazing. You would think something as objectively discrete as an airplane, that there's not a lot of subjectivity in contract requirements. You know,
I don't know.
But, you know, in the software world, I can certainly understand how people can argue, no, that's not what that means. It means this. But even things that even the drilling of a hole in a piece of sheet metal and what the specifications for that hole should be, or what the engineering definition of it was, can become a point of debate among well-intentioned people. I'm not saying anybody's doing anything wrong. No, when I read that engineering requirement, this is what it means. And then
wow, that's interesting, because, you know, I had in my history working on a project a million years ago where management did a horrible job in the scope and specification, and to sit in a meeting where you say, here you go, here's your fin tube configurator, and the customer says, that's not a fin tube configurator, and there's no documentation for either side of what a fin tube configurator is.
Yep.
And you would think that, so, you know, so then we grow up as an organization, you know, working on that project was enlightening to management. And, you know, pretty soon you have a lot of detail, but you would think if you said, you know, the precise location that a hole is to be drilled, and, you know, with diameter and with, you know, with those kinds of specifications, that you would avoid those kinds of discussions about definition. But you're telling me that's not true.
Well, just like in every business, you develop standard operating procedures. You know, you have a certain amount of governance we would refer to it often as command media. So you have your procedural guidance that flows down from your corporate policy. Really, it's saying this is how we are supposed to do business. But the actual product definition, the engineering model for the product that we're building, also has its own set of what I would call standard operating conditions. So you can end up with an instruction set that says build per process specification ABC.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then someone pulls out product specification ABC, and down in the weeds, there's some subjectivity in what that sentence means on page 5, paragraph 2. Oh, it's the craziest thing because you think, because it's a very discrete product, holes in like you said, holes in diameters and locations and tolerances, that there wouldn't be these disagreements, but there always are. There's always disagreements. One of the chief, and the thing, probably over the last several years, the thing that has gotten us in the most difficulty with our customer is the ability to define acceptable levels of risk. That has been probably the thing that has been the most difficult, because nothing is perfect.
Right.
And that's just a reality. When you're building physical product, nothing is perfect. And the accumulation of some of these imperfections, as technology has matured, as our ability to measure more accurately, I would submit to you, and this is just my opinion of having worked in an airplane factory on the shop floor, crawled around on the shop floor on fighter jets. I can tell you that even in my tenure, our ability to measure has gotten better. So 50 years ago, things that we weren't even aware of that were going on in the build process suddenly are visible.
Right.
Because of improvements in technology and the way we do things. And then you have people asking the question, well, what's the risk associated? We just noticed that this issue. We never noticed that before. What is the risk associated with that? And somebody invariably says, oh, we've been doing that for 50 years. you know.
Yeah, yeah.
The only reason we noticed it is because that
the technology to measure, right, gets better.
Well, and part of that is an engineering problem. So when engineers are famously risk adverse, they don't want to take any risk. So what they tend to do is they have their own set of best practices when they're developing either a design or a build instruction. They like to recycle previous engineering data. So if I've got to fasten these two pieces of metal together with a known strength, with a known load requirement, it's much more efficient to me as a designer to look at what we've done in the past and say, spec ABC covers how to fasten those two pieces together, and we'll just do it that way. Well, maybe that's the right thing to do in this case, or maybe it's not. One thing's for sure, you can add a lot of cost to your product by overbuilding it. So as time has gone on, we've tried to reduce overbuilding. We have airplanes that, like the B-52 is, I don't know, 60 years old now? We have products that were built, 60 years ago that are still in active service with the military. Tens of thousands of hours on them. They were probably overbuilt engineering-wise. It's turned out to be a benefit to the customer in this particular example. But when you have a customer says, we want an airplane and we only want it for this cost, they're coming in with a cost ceiling and said it can't be any more than this. We're looking for opportunities to squeeze cost out. So we try to push our engineering team to say, look for opportunities to find ways to reduce the build cost of that airplane. And some of that, we really benefited from a lot of the new technologies for building airplanes.
Right.
But those new technologies also bring their own set of challenges.
Absolutely. And I think no matter the industry, that that message that we count on our engineers to deliver what we consider innovative quality products. At least my engineers always lean towards, build a better tank, build a better everything. And that message of, well, what's the acceptable quality level for what the customer is paying and their expectations? I think all industries battle that.
You could build an airplane that is so safe, no one could afford to fly.
Yeah.
You really can. I mean, you literally could put so much redundancy, so much structural, improvements into it. You can literally build an. We don't have an engineering function where we accept danger. I'm not implying that. I'm just saying the customer is the one who is setting the cost threshold.
Right.
They're the one saying, I need an airplane and it's got to meet these requirements. It's got to be able to carry this on the commercial side. It's got to be able to carry this number of people. We want this fuel burn. We want this kind of maintenance cost. They come in with a set of what they want. And then we say, okay, how can we do that?
Right.
And get the maximum safety and reliability for that amount of money. But at times it gets hard to quantify, it's balancing that engineering challenge with the market need.
Absolutely.
Nobody likes to think about it as a market need. Everybody likes to point at manufacturers and say, oh, that manufacturer's greedy. No, they're not greedy.
They're trying to serve the market and stay in business and stay alive. Right? Because exactly. Because then also you've got the cost of insurance, you've got, for us, cybersecurity policies going through the roof, all the labor, everything you're spending around cyber. And I almost wanted to go down, like the big pharma path where everyone wants to point a finger at greedy businesses, but yet how does that business operate and innovate if it can't make a profit?
Well, and I've read a lot on, and actually I've had employees who came out of the pharma business, and I happen to know within the United States that a tremendous amount of future investment is done with profits from the American pharma industry. So people look at a lot of foreign countries where the cost of pharmaceuticals is either regulated by law or the cost, for whatever reason, is lower based on what the market will bear there. What I think a lot of Americans don't understand about that is a lot of the drugs that you can buy in Canada for less than you can in the United States
or developed
are drugs that Americans have paid to develop. Mm-hmm. And if you take out the margins required to reinvest in new drugs, you essentially stifle innovation. It's the same challenge throughout every industry. You don't want to stifle innovation, but there are some assumptions behind that idea that somehow, this drug company exists to stick it to the little guy. No, they want to make a profit, yes, but their future only exists if they invent new drugs. That they only make so much out of drugs that are out of patent. They don't make, it's only the new drugs that keep them in business and keep them moving forward. And if you take away the incentive to develop for the risk, the huge risk that they take in developing new drugs, and the same for the airplane business. Whenever we roll out a new airplane, there's a famous, the Boeing company, back when the 747 was developed, basically bet the future of the company on the development of that airplane. I think it was back in the 60s. It was so expensive. They were in such hock to develop that airplane. They needed that airplane to be a success. They were betting the entire future of the company. And let's say, for example, that the market wasn't there and they hadn't sold a bunch of airplanes. There's a good chance that company would not have gone forward and existed. You're always trying to leverage your existing knowledge into the future of new products. Aerospace is big in that. Obviously, software is all about innovating.
Well, I will tell you that if you want to stay alive in software and technology, you're going to innovate continually, because a lot of our opportunity has come from small mom and pop shops who built a great piece of software and didn't change it. And after 20 years, it's no longer operable and it's too late for them to innovate. So we've come in multiple times and taken opportunity away because the market's expectation is that you innovate and you keep up. And it was easy for us to take the business because the users, the buyers were looking for something else. We didn't have to malign or say anything against our competitors.
They looked at one, compared it to the other and said, okay.
Yeah, we're going to go with the newer technology, the better customer service. Oh, and it costs less. Gee. So
now you had asked me in our email communication about like my favorite tools.
Yeah.
Project management. Okay, so this is both my favorite tool from a project management and as a quality manager. So as a quality engineer, quality manager. My favorite tool is the process diagram.
Okay.
Flowcharts. And specifically, I know within the software world, there's a specific niche for flowcharting. But my entire career, I would say my success in my career was built on understanding processes. Coming in, writing down the as-is process. Most of the time coming in, looking at an existing procedure and going, wow, that doesn't look like it lines up with what's being done. Let me document the as-is using the process diagram, which is such a great visual depiction of all the logic, the decision points, everything that needs to be done. Here's the as-is. Here's the should-be condition. And that, I would say that's where I made my living, was in that space. It was one of the most underused, underrespected, underappreciated tools is the process diagram, because it allows people to visualize current versus future state. Here's what we're doing today. Here's what it needs to be. You can highlight and identify key in-process measurement points, post-process measurement points, and you can do, so that's by far my most appreciated tool. Like process, kind of my specialty has become process engineering within, let me be specific, that has a different meaning in aerospace, business process engineering, where I would come in and look at what's going on. And that ties in a lot to the corrective action, where we would go in and look at a customer request for corrective action. One of our baseline tools is to go in and document what the existing process is, what the procedure says it is, and then what the future state should be is. And that is where I think I tried to, when I would mentor junior engineers, I tried so hard to get them to use and appreciate that tool. And just watching people's eyes glaze over as you try to explain the benefit of a process diagram and why it's so critical to do it. People have a natural default for written text. They like things written. I can take a 10-page procedure and put it on a one-page flow chart.
Oh, I think the world is shifting your way. As a matter of fact, we've been having meetings with our customers and focus groups around imagery and gamification, shifting away from text, shifting away from paragraphs, being able to impart knowledge with more pictures and as few words as possible, because we're just seeing a world where information workers, maybe it's because of how much has become available to us, but people are starting to be overwhelmed with a lot of words and paragraphs, and now they're looking for those flow charts, those pictures, and what they really, really want is they want the system to come to life and just tell them what to do next.
Yeah.
Right?
No, absolutely. And that's kind of, so if you ask me what is my Gantt charts are great. All the other project statusing tools are wonderful. But if you haven't laid the groundwork in the as is, and I would say that is fundamentally where people screw up. They don't document the as is.
Well, you sound exactly like my guest on episode 2. Fonda Logston and I talked about process documentation and how that's critical early on before the to-be solution. How do you know what the work is if you don't know where you're starting from and having a baseline of where you're beginning to go on this journey? Thank you so much for sharing that. Very fascinating. And I really appreciate talking about your take on quality, because so much in our industry, we're always just talking about testing tools, but I loved your explanation of quality assurance as really the responsibility for delivery according to the contract. And I would say really an essential customer relationship entity.
Yeah, your quality assurance folks need to be fluent in the contract. They need to know what's specified in the terms, the T's and C's, so that they can say, are we hitting these? And
cool.
If your quality folks don't know, and that is something that's one of the more boring sides of the job, is getting in and reading the contract requirements, reading the standards, making sure that you have checklists that line up with discrete points that say, okay, yeah, we got that, okay. And managing that relationship so that the customer also sees you do, as important as it is to do the checklist, to show that, they need to see you doing that, because that inspires confidence that, wow, these guys really take the requirements serious. Look at them. They're going through and making sure. But that's also one of the easiest things to shortcut and cut out of any development program is some of that. Oh, we know how to do that. We don't need to do a validation. We have different processes in the aerospace industry. We call it verification and validation activities. And a lot of times there's an effort, because those are expensive overhead activities, there's a temptation to go, oh, we've done that 1,000 times. We don't need to redo that first article. There's something we call first article inspection. This is the first part that's come off this assembly line. Now, here's an interesting thought. This is where we get into a lot of potential conflict with a customer. The number of inspection points within a physical artifact is potentially infinite.
Right. When
you have an engineering diagram that outlines the dimensions of a part, you cannot inspect every molecule of that part. You have to pick what you believe the key interface characteristics are on that part that really represent the function of that part. And so you design what's called a first article inspection, where we've got the engineering. Okay, we built one. Now we're going to inspect it to make sure it matches the engineering. Well, you can get into a huge, the temptation is to, we don't need as many test points. We've done this 1,000 times. Let's shrink that test point envelope down to something and it's done out of good faith. We've done this 100 times. We don't need to do as many test points. Can we shrink that test point set? And sometimes you can get into a conflict with a customer's expectations. No, I thought you were going to do a full up FAI of every called out specification on the part. No, we weren't going to do that. We couldn't afford to do that. We picked what we believed the key characteristics of that part were. We identified those as test points and we inspected them. So if you're not staying locked in, managing those expectations between what the customer is expecting your internal quality organization to do, that's a key source of customer dissatisfaction, potential customer dissatisfaction.
Well, you've given me a lot to think about. It just so happens, talking about quality assurance and testing, and talking to my team recently about different aspects of, I'm talking to them about using different resources that from customer education, resources from marketing, having multiple resources involved in testing, because they all can represent the customer in a different way. Because a lot of times testing gets down to, and what you just called it, the testing can get down to really focusing on compliance, and rather than defects that may have been introduced in an attempt to get compliance with the specification, an existing product may have had defects injected that are not specified as functional items in this delivery, but now because of the way this happened, it has introduced a new defect. And what happens is, in having different testing and different user profiles interfacing with that product, they bring those other expectations, because this testing team, its first mission when this product came in to say, is this compliant with the change, the write-up and the change? Did we comply? Did we deliver that? And these people out here don't care about that. They're saying, I'm used to using the product to do X, Y, and Z every day. And I pull it up to do the X, Y, and Z that I do every day that has nothing to do with the new functionality, and now it's broken. So you're looking
different, everything's moved.
Right.
I hate it.
Right, I hate it. Well, I really appreciate the amount of time that you've given me. You have so much knowledge. I feel like we've only scratched the surface. So I'm hoping that we can have a follow-up session and talk a little bit more about some different quality assurance methodologies and paradigms in the future.
Sure.
All right.
I'd love to.
Right. Thank you very much, Brent.
All righty.
All right.